we'll do our best, is what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Um, Along with thanking John Hartman, I'd also like to thank Wayne Shimko here for helping me get set up technologically, as you can see.
Except for
Uh, And also for having to suffer through a run through this presentation, make sure that it would at least work to some degree. There will probably be some places where I'll get the wrong picture up on the screen, and we'll just have to fumble around a bit till I get the right one. And you'll just have to put up with me when that happens.
And mention, because you mentioned it a couple times, there are places where you're gonna see a distorted picture. That's the way the picture was when it was taken. I mean, that's the way the picture was when they pulled it out of the archive, so you know.
I'm blocking.
I'd also like to dedicate this presentation to the many members of the congregation over many years who helped make Epiphany what it is today, but are not mentioned in this presentation. Well, having said that, I'd like to say good morning and welcome to the pictorial history of Epiphany today, and for next few Sundays. Since pictures are visual, it will give you a look at what the grounds and buildings were like over time, and it will also show some of the people and their activities. Sometimes a picture will stay on the screen for a long time because we need to finish telling a story, or because there are no pictures for the information being presented. At other times, it will seem to be that we're flipping through them too quickly. If that's the case, just tell me to slow down, and I'll even put a picture back up on the screen if necessary so that you can get a better look at it. The quality of the pictures will vary enormously, from some being dark and fuzzy to others being as bright and sharp as this one looks like. Some of the activities of the congregation will be shown in detail. Others will seem to be neglected simply because we have few or no pictures of them. The most crucial missing item, because in many ways it's really the heart of our activities, is the pastor's messages to us. There are pictures of the pastors sermonizing, but few of their words. This will be the major weakness of this course. Feel free to comment or ask questions at any time, and don't wait for me to call on you. Just say what you want to say, because I'll be probably looking down at my notes here, and I might not see you if you just raise your hand. So please, by all means, go ahead and just say what you have to say. Okay, are we ready to get started?
Yes.
Yes.
Any questions before we start? None? All right. I hope we'll have some questions as time goes on here. Okay. This is Monument Avenue. This was in 1947 when it was first being extended out to Horsepen Road. Remember, before 1947, Monument Avenue went to the city limits, and that was it. It was a 4-lane road out to the city limits. In 47, they began putting out
What would the city limits have been in 1947?
the same place they are now. Yeah. Okay. And this is Monument Avenue when it was still a 2-lane road in 1950. In 1949, Remember that World War II had only been over for 4 years, but that had been time enough for people to get back to civilian life. Do we need some more chairs or something?
Chairs that are
Okay,
seated,
there's
there's
chairs
plenty
here,
of chairs
folks.
there.
We got
Oh.
one chair over here.
Don't be afraid.
We don't have.
Grab a chair here, folks, if you need it. Okay, 1949, World War II had been over for only about 4 years, but it had been time enough for people to get back to civilian life, settle down in jobs, buy houses, start raising families, and thus metropolitan areas such as Richmond had begun to expand, and churches benefited from the influx of new members. This was true for First English Church down on Monument Avenue, as it was for many other denominations. But some members of First English who lived out here toward the West End started thinking about the possibility of a church out here. This led Mr. Andrew Frost to write the synod in December of 1949, inquiring about the possibility of establishing a new church here in the West End. The synod did respond by buying a piece of property here known as the Dundreath property, which is not what we're on now. It was across Horse Pen on Franklin Street. Later, the overlooked mansion property that we're on now of 11.84 acres became available, and the synod bought it for a little under $50,000. And the Dundreath property was sold to the Presbyterians. And this is it now, today, or Tuckahoe Presbyterian churches. This is a little better view of Tuckahoe Presbyterian here. The overlooked property had on it, well, I'm going to tell you what first, and then I'll show you the pictures. An 18-room mansion. I guess well, this first picture will not be a picture of the mansion. This is the drive up to the mansion here. And this is the mansion itself. It also had on it a 6-car garage with a 3-room apartment above it, a caretaker's house, a tool house, and a stable. Now, I'm going to show you pictures of all of these, and if I don't keep them up long enough, let me know. This was the mansion itself. The first picture we saw was before things were cleaned up, and this, of course, is after things got cleaned up a bit at the mansion. This is another picture of the mansion. At first, of course, there was no parking lot or anything, so people just had to park where they could when they drove to the church here, because of course the mansion was used as the church. This is the back of the mansion. Now this is a 6-car garage with the 3-room apartment above it. I assume the apartment was for a chauffeur originally, who knows? And this is the back of the 6-car garage there. And you can see how things are a little bit overgrown, shall we say? And this is the caretaker's house. And you can see that, let's see if I can show it with the, you're gonna have to excuse me, my hands are a little shaky and I'm not sure if this is gonna work or not, but stick with me. Here we have, of course, the caretaker's house, and beyond it just a tool house, and then here is the garage itself there. And then there was also a stable, or some people called it the barn here. This is the only building on campus that still exists, and you're in it. Okay. Now, the mansion was the obvious place to conduct the services. And so the synod began tearing out walls on that first floor to make a large enough space for a sanctuary. It was at this time, in the summer of 1951, that first group of 14 people met under a tree in the yard for Epiphany's first service. Now, the work going on in the mansion, cleaning it out and getting a space made, precluded them from using the mansion for that first service. The synod had already hired a former Army chaplain by the name of Peter C. Schroeder, who had retired from the Army in 1950 to be the mission developer. Oh, I forgot. Just wanted to show you a couple of pictures of what it looked like, how much cleanup the people had at first to do around it. Here they're burning trash, and you can see a truck that they probably used to carry things away to get the area cleaned up. Remember, that was almost 12 acres of property here. R.C. Williamson, who was the first property chair, had a real job here at first, and as they spent literally months upon months cleaning this place up here.
Hey Barry, was the house empty?
The house was empty.
So,
Yes.
yeah, like nobody was living in it
No one
anymore,
was
that's why
living
it
in
was
it.
so run down?
That's correct, yeah. Okay. Now, this is Peter Schroeder, the first mission developer. He's an interesting person. He had retired from the Army in 1950 and had come to, I don't know why, the Virginia Synod, and he was made a mission developer. He had been born in 1897, so he's now 54 years of age, and he and his wife Abigail had 2 sons. He had a distinguished career, having served in the Army in World War I, after which he went to college and then to seminary. But in 1931, he went back in the Army as a chaplain. In 1941, he and his wife were stationed in the Philippines, but he was lucky enough to be transferred back to the United States a few weeks before Pearl Harbor and the subsequent Japanese invasion of the Philippines. Or he and his wife probably would have been Japanese prisoners during the rest of the war. As the U.S. engagement in the war commenced, Schroeder was assigned to General Omar Bradley's staff, and he spent considerable time in the British Isles, where he trained over 500 chaplains of all faiths. And he was the person who chose those chaplains who would accompany Bradley's troops on D-Day. He himself ended up on the continent and accompanied the troops into Germany. One time he had to duck behind a tree to escape a strafing Messerschmitt fighter. He also had a group of German soldiers surrender to him. I thought at first, well, why would soldiers surrender to a chaplain who was unarmed? The chaplains were all unarmed. And then more I thought about it, if I were a German soldier, I might want to surrender to an unarmed officer rather than an armed one. Who knows? He did stay in the Army after the war until 1950, the very year the Korean War began, when he retired as a full bird colonel. After a short stint in Georgia, he was assigned these duties at Epiphany on May 15, 1951. He spent the first couple of months recruiting members for the soon-to-be congregation, while he and his wife lived, where they lived was on the second floor of the mansion here. I can't separate my papers together here. By 1951, the county was widening Monument Avenue from 2 lanes into 4. And this truck there was actually where the houses had been, and all the houses had to be moved back in order to get 4 lanes in all the way out here to Horseman Road. And that completing of that 4-laning of Monument would not take place until 1954, so it took from 51 to 54 to completely 4-lane it here. Here's a picture of Monument 4-lane a little later. And the next picture is simply a picture of the drive up here into the mansion from Horseman. On July 10th, 1951, the fledgling congregation elected a provisional council. Several days later, on July 22nd, those 14 members met under the trees for that initial service. By that fall, though, the first floor of the mansion had been remodeled with room to seat 125 people. And this is a picture, not very good one, of what they had remodeled it to make a sanctuary there. Here's another picture of the same. Again, I'm sorry that these pictures aren't a little better. But a constitution was adopted and the name Epiphany was chosen, apparently at the suggestion of Pastor Schroeder. On December 6th, a women's group was organized with Mrs. Phoebe Mayberg as its president. This is a picture of the women's group, and here's a picture of Mrs. Mayberg here. Then on January 27th, 1952, the church was formally organized with 80 confirmed and 112 baptized members, and it was accepted into the Virginia Synod at the Synod's annual meeting, with Pastor Schroeder attending and Mr. and Mrs. R.C. Williamson attending from Epiphany. And of course, Betsy Williamson is the only charter member still alive here. And unfortunately, she's, of course, well, she's actually in Beth Shalom, the Jewish retirement center here in their, what shall I say? Can't think of the appropriate word.
Assisted living. Assisted living.
Yeah, assisted living facility there. Okay. Okay, I've lost my place here. Otto Mayberg was the council chair, so Mrs. Mayberg's husband, and R.C. Williamson, Betsy's husband, headed up the property committee. Here's a picture of a Sunday school class, and you can see they had to have the class in the sanctuary. You know, there were limited places for them to hold it here. And this is a picture of what, and I don't really know what it is, but I assume it's the women's and girls classes. These are all, you can't see it very well, but these are all women and girls, and they're in the front of the mansion there. And I don't know if they were Sunday school classes or what here. On May 11th, 1952, Pastor Schroeder actually accepted a new assignment in New Jersey for the Board of American Missions, and that left the congregation without a pastor for a couple of months. This upset some of the members of the congregation who felt he had been yanked away without adequate notice. Actually, the Synod was aware, and as early as the previous December, had contacted the Reverend Robert R. Sala at Grace Church in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, about the position. But the folks at Epiphany did not know that, nor did they know ahead of time that Schroeder had accepted a new position. Sala was able to come to Richmond on May 14th and conduct a midweek service. And on June 6th, Council President Otto Mayberg wrote him that they were offering him the position. Pastor Sala, his wife Hilda, and their family arrived at Epiphany in July of 1952. Oh, these are two pictures I meant to show you before. This is a picnic on the lawn in front of the mansion. And this is also one, if you'll notice, let's see if I can show you here. These stone benches that the folks are sitting on there, apparently they were part of the estate that was the synod bought. And apparently these were sold by the church to the cemetery that's out there at Gaskins and Patterson Road there. I went out and inquired, but the gentleman who headed it had only been there 12 years, and he said he didn't know anything about them. I looked all around, and they're not out there anymore, so I don't know what the cemetery did with them there. Well, anyway, Pastor Sala used to love to tell the story when they arrived first here at Epiphany, that the first thing he had to do upon arrival, his first task, they heard a dog barking, and upon looking they discovered a dog apparently had fallen into the pond. Oh, this is a picture of the Salas. This is a later picture. This is not when they first arrived, but it's what I had, so it's what I used. And this is the pond that the dog had fallen into here. And so his first task was rescuing the dog from the pond here. A couple more pictures of the pond. This might be an even better one. And then this next picture isn't quite as good, but it shows that they very quickly put a fence up around the pond there to take care of problems of either people or dogs, I guess, falling into it here. Then on July 20th, Pastor Sala conducted his first service, and the family settled. This is one picture of it. Another. And the family settled on the second floor of the mansion. On September 21st, the Reverend J.J. Scherer, pastor of First English, formally installed Pastor Sala in his new position. Apparently, Pastor Schroeder had told council before leaving that if he had to do it over again, he would have moved his family into the caretaker's cottage rather than occupy the second floor of the mansion. And so council had in their mind that they would remodel the cottage as a parsonage. And I expect that the Salas agreed with him, because it became apparent that the opossums on the third floor of the mansion were making it rather unpleasant for the Salas occupying the second floor here. And it wasn't just the opossums that were bothering the pastor. I'm going to quote from a letter that he wrote to Dr. Homer Anderson, who was superintendent of the Virginia Synod under President Luther Mauney. This was in September 12, 1952. By the way, the heads of the synods were not known as bishops at this time. They were known as presidents, and so it was President Luther Mauney. But anyway, he wrote to Dr. Anderson and said, quote, "I find the membership of 96 is paper membership. Active membership is near 50. The offerings are pitiful. Church attendance is low. The redeeming feature is that the good part is good." In another paragraph, he says, "I divide my time as Pastor Schroeder did between being a pastor and being a caretaker. The members have put in many hours of labor here, but there comes a time when that is no longer as appealing as it once was here. They don't have the time. I live here. I've got to take the time. He goes on to say, if you get the general impression that some aspects of this setup make me unhappy, you get it right. I have every confidence that the end result will be good. I also believe there will be considerable agony in the process. He would discover that winter that keeping the coal-fired furnace adequately stoked was yet another agony that he had to face. But things moved on. Now, why this picture is here, I'm not sure. I don't think this is the one I wanted. Here's the one I want. The Sunday school area and the nursery and everything in the mansion was pretty crowded, as you can see by pictures such as this here. In early October, Mrs. James Marsh became the first choir director. In November, the congregation began the process of taking over the property title from the synod, a move that Pastor Sala opposed because he didn't think they were ready for it yet. But with the Board of American Missions holding first and third mortgages and the synod the second mortgage, all on favorable terms to the congregation, it did work out. It wasn't until early 1954 that the congregation received full title to the property. And at that time, the indebtedness was $57,100, but payment of $4,000 by Henrico County for land that they took to widen horse pen, they reduced that indebtedness to $53,100. At the end of 1953, confirmed membership had grown from 80 to 107, baptized to 154. Attendance at worship averaged 50, and Sunday school enrollment was at 65. In February, the first congregational dinner was held. Also that June, the first vacation church school was held under the direction of, anyone recognize this lady? Betsy Williamson. Right. And she's been active in the church ever since here to the degree that she can. It wasn't until wait a minute. By the end of 1953, I've told you what the membership amounted to here. The big concern, though, in '53 was the sale of portions of the property, which could help pay down their mortgages and perhaps put some aside toward a chapel. This necessitated deciding where the church building would be located, the new church building once they got it built here. Some suggesting the corner of Three Chop and Horse Pen, and others wanting it facing where Monument Avenue dead-ended into Horse Pen. In September, it was decided to build at the corner of Three Chop and Horse Pen and sell much of the property where the buildings were located. This was also the month when the newly organized Tuckahoe Rescue Squad was housed in the 6-car garage here. And Pastor Sala became the chaplain of that squad and remained so for many years. The squad would stay in the garage for a year and a half, for 18 months, at which time they moved into their recently completed facilities across the street at Three Chopped and Horse Pen, which is where they are today, of course. In the meantime, an architect had been hired to suggest ways to remodel the 6-room caretaker's cottage. There's the cottage as a parsonage, but with the Salas having a daughter as well as sons, they needed 3 bedrooms, as well as a bigger living room. The architect suggested taking out a wall to enlarge the living room into one of the 2 existing bedrooms, and then adding on to the house by building 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. But it was decided, instead of doing that, to build a separate parsonage. And in February of 1954, construction began at a parsonage on 7310 Three Chop Road. Remember, the church owned the property all the way over to Three Chop Road in that direction there, so they could do that. That parsonage was finished and dedicated in May at a cost of $13,250, and the Salas moved in that June, which freed up the second floor of the mansion to be used for Sunday school classes. In 1953 also saw the first production of the Epiphany Examiner. Oops, this is the, I should have told you, this is the parsonage as it exists now. I took 2 years trying to get a picture of that parsonage, and this was the cleanest I could get here. That pile of stone there has been sitting in that front yard for over 2 years. I can attest to that, and it's still there today. Why, I don't know here. But this is, if you look at on Three Chop, you'll see there are 5 single-story brick houses down. This is the 5th house down there on that street. Okay. In 1953, Pastor Sala produced the first of the Epiphany Examiners, and this was it. He wrote all the articles. He was the editor, the assembler, and the distributor. However, a month later, when the second edition came out, he had assembled 4 women to help him type it, and 7 women and 1 man to help him assemble and distribute it. That one man, by the way, was charter member Matt Berryman, who remained a member of Epiphany until his death in 2018. Pastor Sala remained the editor for years and often put summaries of his sermons in the newsletter. The Lutheran Church women, of course, would have an article. The Couples Club did. When they got a Boy Scout troop here, the Scouts had articles in it. Other church groups and committees also had regular articles. And the pastor almost always had an article on the welfare of the congregational members in it. The first half of 1954 proved to be a busy time for the congregation. Not only was a junior choir organized, but importantly, the action was rescinded on where to build the sanctuary. And it was decided to build where Monument Avenue ends and dispose of the land along Three Chop Road on that side, but also what is now West Grace Street on the other side. And for this, they gained $30,500, keeping the one lot, of course, on which the parsonage was built. Thus, the indebtedness of the church's remaining 5.5 acres, which we still have today, was about $36,185. But there were other expenses to be met. The boiler in the mansion had to be replaced at a cost of $1,975, almost $2,000. Much of this was met by the congregation, whose contributions in 1954 amounted to $11,000 here, part of which came from the 66 new confirmed members received during that year. Now, the success in attracting new members was due to 2 causes, I think. One was the pastor's numerous calls on prospects, but also a 12-member evangelism committee that called on prospects every 2nd and 4th Mondays of each month of the year. So 24 times during the year they would call on prospects. Despite the October visitation of Hurricane Hazel, which took down 2 trees on the property and caused some of the members to lose their power, the average attendance rose to 95 per service. That was a 44% increase over the previous year. See if I can get my pages apart here. Sunday school enrollment increased from 110 to 170 with an average attendance of 85. Pastor Sala also conducted 4 adult instruction classes during the year, and he would continue to offer such classes every year. In 1955, the year in which the Vietnam War began, an 8:45 a.m. matins class was added to the 11 a.m. service with the Sunday school at 9:45 a.m. So that's pretty close to what we have today, except we begin at 8:30 instead of 8:45. This was continued throughout the year, except for the period from the beginning of summer till the end of August, when only one service was held at 9:45. Here's a 3rd edition of the Examiner announcing a fellowship dinner, and it was about this time that Mrs. Constance Coiner became president of the women's group. And I've got a couple of pictures, more pictures of the women's group here. Her husband, Junius, who worked for General Electric, would later quit his job and go to seminary and become a Lutheran pastor. And for a number of years, he was pastor of Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Lexington, Virginia. In 1955, however, he served as Epiphany's choir director. Also in 1955, a parking lot, this is out of the Examiner, by the way, a parking lot was cleared for 40 cars. And here you can see the mansion here, and the cottage, the tool house, the garage, and what they did, and here's the driveway, of course, coming up to the mansion. They cleared this area here as a parking area, so that when you go to church, at least you'd have a place to park for a change. Also, in 1955, a Boy Scout troop was organized, and the pond was drained and filled in. But probably the most important event was the vote to proceed with a building program. Now, this is a mouthful, but the Lutheran Layman's Movement Fund Raising Service was hired, and the congregation approved its recommendations on December 18th, which was also the very day that the congregation learned that an anonymous donor had donated a Baldwin electric organ to the church. A pledge raising campaign was begun, and this was over the first 3 months of 1956, and this is the brochure that they put out to try to get people to contribute here toward what would become the new church building here. They had a goal of $30,000 to be given over a 100-week period. That's almost 2 years, 100 weeks here. What they did, they actually met the goal with 28,000. They didn't quite make the 30,000. However, Dr. Elwood Bowman of the Board of American Missions told the congregation they would need $51,000 in cash or pledges before construction could begin. In 1956, a scout troop now had 15 boys in it, and programs were added for Girl Scouts, Cub Scouts, and Brownies. Also, the Couples Club, which had been established was active, and with an attendance at its monthly meetings of averaging 70 people, it in 1955 took on the task of developing the stable into a recreation building. And by that fall, they had done so. And that's why we now have a fireplace and other things in here that obviously weren't here when it was just a stable. In 1956, the Ladies Guild had officially joined the United Lutheran Church Women. The total income of the church for '56 rose to $12,732, and the benevolence to the synod was overpaid. Now, I need to really probably tell you that at this time yet, the synod was still paying a part of the pastor's salary. So that might explain how they could pay the pastor and still do these other things with the income that they had. At the end of the year, the church had 259 confirmed members and 418 baptized. 1957 would be the 5th anniversary of the congregation. 50 of the original 80 members still remain. The first books were given to start a library. Well, this is the Lutheran Church Women, who had 4 subcommittees that took care of specific needs. There was an altar committee, a kitchen committee, a nursery committee, and a hostess and hospitality committee. To build a sanctuary with offices, a building committee was appointed with Warren Smith as chair. Another picture of the women's group, sorry. And another, here's Warren Smith. And this is his wife, Geraldine Smith, with him. Both of them were very active in the church, as we'll find out as time goes on. A leadership training school was conducted jointly with First English Church, and a Bible study was conducted on Sundays with an average attendance of 10 people. However, not all was looking rosy at the end of the 6th year. When the year ended, the pastor complained that for the first time there had been difficulties in getting members of the congregation to do all the activities a church needed, such as ushering its services. And might I add that we still have these problems today. The first mortgage was rewritten in 1957, and Epiphany made a payment sufficient to reduce its indebtedness to $19,812 plus $11,440 on the parsonage. The original 100-week pledge would expire in February of '58, and Harvey Hansen was appointed chair of a committee to conduct an additional one-year campaign. Meanwhile, the building committee spent the first months of '57 developing the requirements for the new building, which council accepted with slight modifications on July 12th of '57. Ballou and Justice was hired as the architect, and the work was begun on preliminary plans. In October of '58, the United Lutheran Church of America Department of Church Architecture approved the plans. Let's see. And here are the plans. And you can see it's pretty much like we know it today as far as the sanctuary goes there, except that, of course, we've enlarged it with a bigger narthex on it and the balcony and so on. But you can see then where the cross is. Well, let me show it. Here's the cross. And this was just a walkway here. But notice this little alcove here too. It's got 3 doors, one out to each end here and one down into the narthex here. Obviously, there weren't nearly as many pews in this early church as we have today here, and we'll get to that in due time. All right. The campaign had netted a total of about $26,000 in the year from April 1st, 1959 to March 31st, 1960. Now this was on top of what they had gained in that 100-week campaign earlier here. And in the period from April 1960 to December of that year, an additional $15,000 was raised. Meanwhile, the bids on the church building had been opened on December 17, 1959, and none of them appeared low enough, and the building committee began working with the low bidder and reduced costs by $7,000, apparently largely by deleting the proposed air conditioning. When this was submitted to the Department of Church Architecture, the congregation was delighted when they received a question back as to whether they would like to proceed on the original plans without the $7,000 deletion. Enough pledges had come in through the last few months to allow this, and so the congregation did proceed without the deletions, and we do have air conditioning. 1959, though, was a difficult year in other ways for the congregation. Its members have been increasing in figures of the 30s over the past several years. In 1959, they only increased by 4. This was not due to the lack of new members that year, but rather due to 32 members, including the Maybergs, transferring to the new congregation of St. Luke's in Chesterfield County. This was also the year that the United Lutheran Church women divided into 3-night and 2-day circles, 5 circles, to better serve the women, though obviously they would eventually end up back to 3, which is the number they have now. On the other hand, early 1959 also saw the disbanding of the Couples Club, with the $20 left over in its treasury used toward the purchase of Luther Small Catechism film strips there, I guess for Sunday school use. Here's the dedication of the new building. This is Mrs. Almond, Judge Almond's wife, breaking ground. And this is Governor Almond himself, breaking ground for the church here. And this is what it looked like. This was the dedication pamphlet, of course, and we basically got that picture in the narthex of the church today. If you go in, you can see it here. And this is the official picture at the dedication of the church. It's actually a little wider than what I've shown here, and you can see this picture, of course, in the Berger Commons there today. Once the new sanctuary was up, the number of members joining the church increased significantly, and also, of course, giving toward the educational wing. The one thing that sticks out in my mind from when we started coming to Epiphany here, though, was something else here. Let me explain, I guess. In late 1961, when my wife Eddie and I joined the church, the present sanctuary, of course, was already in use. The mansion was being used as the Sunday school classes. But the mansion itself was so overcrowded that even a bathroom was being used for a Sunday school class. And everyone was looking forward to the building of an educational wing. So we missed this picture of the sanctuary dedication. That's before our time here, but we didn't miss the building of the new educational wing. And the one thing that sticks out in my mind about when we first came to Epiphany was that during the Christmas season of 1961, that was the year we joined the church, Anna Platz sang Silent Night in German, Still Nacht, here from the lectern on Christmas Eve. And she continued doing that for a number of years afterwards. And yesterday, I went over to Beth Shalom to see Betsy, and I showed Betsy this presentation that you're getting right now. And when I got to this point, I said that one thing stuck out in my mind about what Anna Platz had done before I could tell her. She said it was Betsy singing Still Knocked on Christmas Eve. So she guessed what I was going to say there. So obviously, it wasn't just me that was impressed by Anna's singing here. Okay. In 1962, a new building, how's our time? We've still got some.
You got 10 minutes.
No questions so far?
Barry,
Golly.
Barry, where did the mansion sit on the property?
I'm sorry, say
Where
that again.
Where did the mansion sit on the property relative to where the?
The only thing I can figure is it must have been pretty close, to where the sidewalk comes out in the back of the church there, the back of, just beyond what is now the columbarium there. You can probably figure it out from some of these pictures almost as well as I can there. Even though I was here at the time it was up, but I simply don't remember it well enough.
Barry, during drought here, even now, you can see where the foundations were
Oh, you can?
between Price Hall and the utility shed.
Yep.
It'll get bare brown grass earlier than the rest of the lawn.
Buck, that's in,
So I think that's where the big house was.
right, yeah. I did not realize that. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, in 1962, a new building fund committee was set up to raise funds toward the educational wing. As I mentioned, the mansion continued to be used as for the Sunday school. But that year also saw a fire damage the 6-car garage to such an extent that it had to be raised. The Boy Scout troop did not recover from the loss of their home and their equipment in that garage there, though a new troop, 780, would soon take its place. This was also the year that the Lutheran Church in America came into existence here through the ULC's merger with 3 other Lutheran groups. Pastor Sala was one of the Virginia Synod's delegates to the Constituting Convention in Detroit, Michigan. With the new sanctuary, this is one example of it. Another. And this was the alcove there going into the narthex, and you can see you could go out either 2 sides there on it. But this saw the largest net gain in new members in this church's history up to that time. Pastor Sala was hoping they could add the educational wing within 3 years, and a new building committee was appointed. About mid-year, the property committee hired a custodian on a full-time basis. Oh, by the way, let me go back a bit here. This picture was not a picture of the alcove originally. Is there anyone here who can tell me how you know that this was not a picture of the alcove as it was originally?
The window?
Exactly, the window. It's a stained glass window. None of the windows in the church were stained glass at this time here. Okay, I don't know who wrote on this, but I figured that I have to use it anyway. This was a picture of the Platz family. They're sitting in that very front row. There's Adolf on this side. I don't know if I can, right here, and Anna on this side, and there are 4 children here, Stephanie and Fritz and Valerie and Irene. whoever did it misspelled Platz, P-L-A-T-Z, and they put P-L-A-T there. But what I also wanted to show you with this, look in the back here, along here. Notice that you've got a screen. This differentiated the pews from what we'll call the narthex. And if you look, you'll see that the narthex is in front of the two windows. That tells you how far front that narthex was at the time of the original church. So the seating area was not nearly as large as it is, of course, today, even just down on the first floor, not counting the balcony at all here. Okay. And now I've completely lost my place. I have no idea where we stopped.
The screen.
Yeah, we talked about the screen. Let me see what the next picture is. Maybe that'll, oh, okay. This is the church as it originally looked. And as you can see, in the windows, there's no stained glass at all. What else? Well, let me get a better picture. Here, what other differences do you notice from the church today?
No carpet.
No carpet, right?
No rail.
The pie board is.
Well, there's a rail, but where is the rail? Yeah, it's right up by the altar there. And people had to get up there to get communion there. The communion rail, of course, would later be brought down. There's another difference.
It looks like the pulpit is on the right.
You're right. The pulpit and the lectern are switched. The pulpit is on the right here.
And the altar is flat against the cross.
Pardon?
The altar is flat against the cross.
Yeah, you can't see it, of course, from this picture, but that altar is right back against the wall. You can't walk in back of it at that time either. And this is an example of the congregation at that time. And again, you can see the windows are wide open as far as not being of stained glass. Another picture from the front looking backwards to the congregation. Okay. Now, this is a picture of folks coming into the church. Now notice what they had to do to seat everyone. They had to put seats down the middle aisle here. And the church at this time decided to hire a full-time caretaker and to grant him the what do you call it?
Caretaker. Was the caretaker?
Yeah, the caretaker's house for a place to live for him and his family here. Well, let's try to summarize things up here at this time. The offerings of the congregation improved to a point where they could make a substantial prepayment toward their second mortgage, and plans were made for a fund drive for the educational wing in the spring of '63. At the end of the first 10 years, baptized membership stood at 700, while confirmed membership was 448. And this was quite a change from the 80 confirmed and 112 baptized in 1952 when they began. One last thing and we'll quit for today. Pastor Sala was known as quite a fisherman. And in November of 1962, the Examiner reported that he had caught a 4.5-pound bass, but that Austin Umlauf had outdone him by catching an 8-pounder.
I remember that picture.
And here's another picture of Pastor Sala and his fish. And with that, folks, I think it's about time to adjourn.
Thank you,
and
Barry.
begin Mary.
attendance sheet going around, if the adults could make sure you sign the adult one, and then the youth have a separate attendance sheet, if everyone can make sure they mark themselves down before you head out, we would appreciate that for records.
Thank you.
I don't know where they are floating around. But
I didn't see
didn't
mine.
see 'em. That's what Ramona put them out here earlier, so I didn't know if they just got set down or they spread somewhere, but I'll figure out where they are.
They're in the car for a month and a half.
Thank you.
No, I've marked down where I left off. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
I marked down all these on my phone, just the ones that
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, no, that's all right. They're going around. Well, as long as we get some people. I mean, I counted, but.
It recorded, so that's good.